Hello, I think we should start. My name is Liana Theodoratou, and on behalf of the AS Onassis program in Hellenic Studies at NYU, I would like to welcome you all here tonight. Greece, after, I would say, centuries in the shadow, is in the limelight again. The historic elections of January 25, 2015, brought Syriza to power, a left party which has promised to lift Greece out of the humanitarian crisis and to redefine the social and political direction of the country. At the same time, the new government is facing a harsh opposition from the EU and from Germany especially. These days, these months, are critical for the future of Greece, but also for the future of Europe and of the world. And as a program in Hellenic Studies, we thought that it would be nice to have, that it's a time to have a series of discussions on the situation in Greece. We are very honored, extremely honored actually, that our first speaker is the internationally acclaimed writer, filmmaker, and activist Tariq Ali, who is one of the most sharp, perceptive, insightful, sensitive, thoughtful, generous thinkers I know. Tariq Ali has been a leading figure of the international left since the 1960s. He is a member of the editorial committee of the New Left Review and Sin Permiso, and is a regular contributor to the Guardian, Counterpunch, and the London Review of Books. Tariq Ali thinks the world and writes the world, whether it is the US, Pakistan, Greece, the Middle East, Bolivia, Iran, Venezuela, the Soviet Union. Tariq Ali is there too. He has written over 30 books, including 7 novels, published in many languages, and as well as scripts for the stage and for the screen. The titles of his books alone can give one a sense of the depth of his thought. His latest book, The Extreme Center, A Warning, just published from Verso Books. On history, Tariq Ali and Oliver Stone in Conversation. The Obama Syndrome, Surrender at Home, War Abroad. Night of the Golden Butterfly, The Idea of Communism, The Duel, Pakistan on the Flight Path on American Power, Conversations with Edward Said, Speaking of Empire and Resistance, and innumerable others. We're very privileged to have Tariq Ali here with us tonight. The title of his talk is Syriza versus the Extreme Center. Please help me welcome Tariq Ali at NYU.
Thanks for the kind intro. I'm very happy to be here to be discussing this subject because we're at a very critical stage now in Europe as a whole and, of course, in Greece. I will come back to the present situation in Greece a bit later. I think what is important is to understand something which isn't discussed too much these days, either in the media or even on campuses, which is the tormented and tortured history of Greece for many, many decades, and especially the Second World War. I think it's worth recalling when we're discussing the traditions of the Greek left that the resistance against the German occupation, the fascist occupation of Greece, was largely led by communists. That they led the resistance by the end, when the Germans were being defeated. I don't think it's a big exaggeration to say that at least 3/4 of the country was with the Greek communists, largely because they had led the resistance and had shown that Greek pride and dignity could not be defeated by an occupying force. The tragedy of Greece was that despite this fact, the beginnings of the Cold War, the fact that Greece was used as a football by both sides in the Cold War, the fact that at the Yalta agreements, the Russians had agreed that Greece would not be part of the Soviet sphere of influence, as it was loosely defined. And unfortunately, the Greek Communist Party could not resist those. There were big fights within the party on these questions amongst the Kapitanios, the partisans, their leaders. Many wanted an independent socialist Greece. Not far away, there was the model of Tito, who had fought also as the leader of resistance and created a socialist republic in Yugoslavia. But it was not to be. And the consequences for that failure, if you like, political failure rather than a military one, in my opinion, was that Greece became part of the Cold War apparatuses of the NATO powers and the United States, that, in my view, a big tactical mistake was made to fight this by armed struggle when the situation had altered completely, instead of seeing the changes that had taken place and adjusting accordingly. That civil war, which didn't end till 1949, was a brutal and vicious civil war. And hundreds and thousands of Greek people had to go into exile. Different parts of Eastern Europe. There was a town in Yugoslavia whose name I now forget, which was virtually, or not virtually, completely a Greek town run by the Greek Communist Party, and which became a big refuge for many, many Greeks. And this, right from 1949 onwards, created huge problems in creating something inside Greece itself, since the bulk of the communists, socialists, were in the exterior, in exile. And that is where Greek left politics were determined for many years to come. And this distorted them for obvious reasons, which it's not necessary to go into. And then when changes began, Greece began to change as well. But being so closely allied to the United States provided problems. It meant that successive Greek governments effectively did the bidding of the United States. I give you one concrete example. During the occupation of Greece, the Germans, the occupying Germans, took away the entire gold reserves from the Greek banks. Now, this is, given what is going on now, this is not a small fact. They took away the entire gold reserves, worth about 18 billion euros today. And if you add 3% interest over the last 66 years, they're worth a lot more. Or let's even add 2% interest. It would pay the debt many times over. Why didn't the Greek government demand the loan back, the robbery back, saying return our gold? They didn't demand it back because they were part of the NATO operation, and the Americans told all their allies that don't ask the Germans for war reparations because we are trying to rebuild West Germany into a bulwark of freedom and capitalism, given that East Germany is under Russian control, so don't ask for anything now. Wait. They waited. In 1990, when Germany was reunified, successive finance ministers of Greece, starting with Samaras, who was then finance minister, the last conservative prime minister, went to talk to the Germans and said, hey guys, it's time. We had the money and the gold you stole from us, we need it back. The Germans said no. Andreas Papandreou did exactly the same thing some years later when he was in power. In 2000, Kostas Mites again asked for the money to be returned. Again, the Germans said no. In 2015, Tsipras once again brought up the question and said, the way you are talking, it's as if it's a one-sided problem. You have a long-standing debt to Greece, and let's readjust it. Again, no reply. Or contemptuous, the complete contemptuous character of the German government in even discussing this. Why? It's almost as if they believe that the only country to be given compensation is Israel. But Israel didn't exist at the time of the Second World War. It was largely a consequence of it. And the people who are to blame for that are the German ruling elite of the time. They are paying the Israelis for the crimes they committed against the Jewish people in Europe during the Second World War. Is no one else entitled to reparations at all? Evidently not, and certainly not Greece. And I say this not in a demagogic way, but I believe it's a serious point. And the fact that the rest of Europe refuses to accept this indicates what has happened inside the European Union itself. That far from being an organization which is democratic, whose parliament makes decisions, it has de facto become a federal Europe with the Germans in command. That is the honest truth. No serious decision can be made within the EU without the approval of the Germans. And this is a result of many things. It's a result, of course, of the fact, it's a recognition of a fact that the Germans are the single most important country in Europe today, economically, politically. They are not a totally sovereign country because the EU is still very much dominated by the Atlantic, by Atlanticism, by NATO, by the United States. So it's difficult to say that any country in Europe is sovereign, not even the Germans, who are the strongest. And this effectively has meant that in terms of dealing internally with the economic problems, the Germans, by and large, have been given the green light by the United States to do what they want. Externally, they can't. They can't act as an independent sovereign state, but within the EU, they have been given the leeway and the permission to do as they see fit, and they have been doing it with disastrous consequences. But to return to Greece for a moment, the current crisis in Greece is a direct result of the 2008 Wall Street crash of financialized capital that took the world by surprise and created havoc. In the United States, they bailed out the banks and provided some stimulus to get the economy working again. In Europe, they spent trillions in bailing out the banks, who had only themselves to blame and the politicians who backed the policies which they were carrying out. Now, that posed no problems for them because they felt that the future of the system was at stake, and it was a systemic crisis and therefore could only be helped and dealt with by who? The state. The state, which under neoliberal politics and economics was not permitted to pour in money to create a social structure, to increase spending on health, education, public housing, etc. That was not allowed. But bailing out corrupt banks and bankers who had been growing rich on the fats of the system for years, that was allowed. And this created anger amongst the people, but it took a long time before any resistance began, a really long time. 2008, it took 4 years, let's say in Greece, before Syriza, a coalition of left-wing groups, suddenly jumped in the opinion polls because it was offering a challenge to this type of politics and economics. And it jumped. I think the figures are quite astonishing, initially from 10 to 20% and subsequently even more. So by the time of the 2012 elections, Syriza was a serious contender for power. And the European ruling elite panicked. They panicked. And they sent anyone they could get hold of. The Germans, of course, said very clearly, with a united voice at that time, they said to the people of Greece, don't elect Syriza, because if you do, there will be problems. The German edition of the Financial Times published a whole page in Greece to distribute in that country, again warning the people of Greece, don't vote for Syriza. Francois Hollande, elected president that year, went to Greece again to say, don't vote for Syriza. The entire European media elite put up the threat of Syriza. They are extremists, they are populists. Tsipras has said that the leader he most admires in the world is Hugo Chavez. That really did send shiver down some spines. And they said, we can't tolerate that. We just can't and won't tolerate that. And then the fear that was created by the center parties in Greece itself, what I call the extreme center, whether center left or center right, they do the same thing. And they do awful things. And they were frightening, especially older people with pensions, sick people. They said, you know, if we do this and challenge the EU, all the pharmacies will close down, medicines will stop being supplied. It was a real campaign of fear. And this campaign, unfortunately, worked. These things do sometimes work, as we know. And so Syriza lost by a narrow margin. But one thing was clear, that PASOK as a political party was finished. It lost huge amount of support in 2012, and it was clear even then that it wasn't going to recover. Why? Because its membership and its political base went into exile. They said, enough, no more. What is the difference between you and Samaras? Two things happened at the time. Given the scale of the crisis, given the election of Samaras, who then carried out the policies of the Troika, and these policies were what? They were effectively neoliberal policies. One or two things they demanded was not bad, which is no one pays taxes in Greece, and this should be remedied. Well, we can all agree with that. But the key here is not the large majority of Greek people, but a tiny, small minority of oligarchs and ship owners and the rich who never pay taxes and never have paid them, because often they've owned politicians, and they don't feel the need to pay taxes. So on this one point, one can agree that we need more accountability, that we need transparency, that fiscal policies have to be implemented. But the fiscal policies, especially taxation, are not policies easy to implement. Samaras failed. He couldn't do it. He tried, or so he says, but even he couldn't fulfill all the demands of the Troika. And gradually, over the last 3-4 years, you have what Tsipras and Varoufakis in particular have called a humanitarian crisis. I mean, I have been to that country many, many times, not just recently, but over the years. I have never seen Greece in such a bad state. People don't know. And the reason people don't know is because it is not reported in the mainstream media. If they reported what is going on in Greek cities, even the big cities, Athens and Salonika, and the islands, and the countryside in small villages, how people are living, how a system of barter has almost been reintroduced in parts of the country, they would have a shock. This is this is Europe. This is a member state of the European Union. And these policies have been imposed on it with no regard for the well-being of the common people. They don't care, the elites. And they've done the same in Ireland, they've done the same in Portugal. It's not Greece alone. They didn't do exactly the same thing in Spain. It wasn't run by the Troika, but very similar policies were introduced by the Spanish conservative government in Spain as well. And these policies are effectively to leave the poor to fend for themselves, to create phenomenally high levels of unemployment, and make sure that the economic system, the neoliberal economic system in this country, is not affected. And this has created a huge gulf now between large numbers of people, especially but not exclusively young people, who say they want nothing to do with this system. And they make this point clear mainly by not voting. Or they only vote now in large numbers for parties which say we will take on this system, we will not carry through these policies, and we will provide an alternative. That is what is happening now, 7 years after the economic crash. And it's in this context that we see the victory of Syriza. That they carried on campaigning after 2012. They were more careful, it's true, but huge crowds came to the meetings, and they campaigned very effectively. I saw some of it with my own eyes. I was at a big rally organized by the Syriza youth on the same platform, speaking with Tsipras and others. And you could see the enthusiasm, that people felt this time we are going to win. Nothing is going to stop us. They almost won an overall majority. And had the other party of the Greek left, the Kokeye, not been so deeply embedded in a sort of, what to call it, an antediluvian sectarianism, going back to the Stone Age of socialism, they would have had an overall majority. The Syriza leaders said to them, come with us, join the coalition, you can attack us, you can influence us, come so we are together. They refused. And had they not refused, there would have been an overall majority for the left. But on this, I think a compromise was necessary with the independents. I don't agree with them at all with the independents, but the interesting point about them was that they had no illusions about the EU and Europe. So Tsipras knew that if it came to a real hard fight, they would not withdraw support, as the, what are they called, Potamos probably would, because they are, embedded in the whole culture of the EU. So the victory was the impact of that victory throughout Europe and I have to say in many parts of South America was amazing. People felt hope had been reborn again, that for once there was a government elected in Europe which had got elected on the basis of challenging all these policies and the people promoting them. And that hope still exists. It's not going to go away. The point was this, that there was some within Syriza, like the economist Lapavitsas, who together with other colleagues, including some German economists, produced an alternative plan and an alternative program, thinking and imagining that the EU was not going to grant any concessions to the leadership of Syriza at all, that they were basically going to throttle them, and that a plan B was necessary in case the first plan failed. And so there is within Syriza a strong view that if necessary, the EU has to be taken on, and if necessary, if the choice is a withdrawal from the Eurozone or staying within the Eurozone and continuing the Troika policies, that's no choice at all. It's not a serious choice. Even though the problems in the first 6 to 8 months would be great, my own feeling is that the Greek people who would have to vote for such a choice, it's been promised by Syriza during the elections, before any drastic steps are taken, you will be asked to decide in a referendum. And this, I think, now becomes absolutely crucial. We have been witnessing this farce in Europe over the last few weeks, where the Syriza leaders state what their policy is, the basis on which they were elected to power, and are denounced by everyone. Not just the Germans, all the sort of little German puppets in the EU. This Dutch finance minister, who Varoufakis called a liar at the meeting, rightly so, because he is a liar. Many of them lie. They tell untruths. So why shouldn't they learn? Why shouldn't they hear the truth once in a while? Shock, horror, this is language not used. But how else do you define a liar? You can be politer and say, sir, you're addicted to untruth. But you can be blunt as well. And either works, because effectively, what is at stake now is not just Greece versus Germany or Greece versus Germany and its friends. What is at stake is the very future of democracy itself. I think it has to be seen in that way, that the neoliberal economic system has produced and given birth to monstrous political structures where no alternative to the system is permitted. In the old days, when countries behaved like that, with one party or two parties even, they were called totalitarians. I would say that the form of democracy that we are witnessing in many parts of the world, Europe and North America is very obvious, but not just there, is a form of what now we have to categorize as a form of authoritarian democracy which brooks no challenge to the existing economic and political system. And in fact, this has been spelt out very clearly by a German sociologist, Wolfgang Streeck, whose books I really would recommend. I don't agree with him on everything, but his critiques of how the EU functions as an entity and how it deals with smaller countries and why this is affecting democracy is a very strong book. Very strong book. So that is what is at stake, and you can see it very simply. the Greek people elect a government to challenge the Troika and to challenge the economic system that the Troika has imposed on them, and by extension everyone else, though for them it's Greece which is the big problem. Naturally, the government is elected. Soon after the government is elected, the EU elite, led by the Germans, says it doesn't matter to us what's been elected and why. I mean, Schäuble, the German finance minister, said 2 days ago in a very patronizing fashion, you know, I do feel a bit sorry for the Greeks. Well, thank you very much. You don't need to feel sorry for the Greeks. Just let them implement what the people want the government to implement and return the money you stole from them during the Second World War. Then you can feel sorry for yourself or whoever you want. But do that for a start. But that is the way they are maneuvering. And in all the talks, the Germans have been the toughest and hardest. Today's EU memorandum on this subject, after the talks, has given the bailout will continue for 4 more months, in return for which Syriza cannot take any unilateral measures. They will only be allowed to use the money over the next 4 months if the Troika, i.e. the 3 institutions of imperial rule today in Europe, if the Troika feels that the money is going to be spent as it sees fit. This is written down black and white in the memorandum that was issued today. Now, it's a huge problem. And for all those of us who have been extremely sympathetic and supportive of Syriza, some members of Syriza are here, I have been supportive of them and still am. Sooner or later the choice has to be made, how far can we go? Testing the patience of our own people who have suffered so much over the last 10 years. How far can we go? It's not a choice I can make, it's a choice the elected leadership of Syriza has to decide on. And if after 4 months, you see, if the 4-month deal goes through, and we still don't know whether it'll go through, because the 23rd is now the date on which they've said the final decision will be taken, a few days from now, on Monday, in fact. So we will see what happens on Monday. I do not believe the Germans are in a mood to make any concessions at all except those of the cosmetic variety. If you want to look pretty, we'll give you a little makeup, but basically underneath it will all remain the same. That is the German opinion. And it's a strong opinion, and the reason for it has a rationale. It's not that they're just being brutal and punishing. They are, but there's a reason for it. And the reason is this, that if we make these concessions to the Greek government, which has been elected, what sort of message will they send to the rest of Europe? What sort of message will they send to Podemos in Spain, who are now the largest party according to the opinion polls in Spain, and who, if things carry on like this, will win Spain? We will see. I may be wrong, but I think I'm right, that things are about to change. And the Syriza victory, therefore, is not only important for Greece, it's been extremely important for the rest of Europe. And already in Ireland, there are attempts being made by Sinn Féin to unite the left, and they say, like Syriza, to take out and defeat the extreme center in Ireland, which has been wrecking the country. I mean, the mass demonstrations against water privatization in Ireland recently were model. So when you have a combination of a political triumph as in Greece, together with mass movements as the anti-privatization campaigns in Ireland, then you have serious possibilities. This is what the Germans are frightened of. not just because of the smaller countries, but they feel that if we allow these small Mediterranean countries or the Irish to get away with this, how are we going to deal with France and Italy, who we are pushing to make certain reforms? And you know, I hate this word reform. It once upon a time used to be an honorable word. It's like the language of neoliberalism is sort of debased. So reforms, when they talk about reforms, the word sort of inspires hatred, because we know what reforms for them are. Privatizations on a huge scale, cutting down state spending for social reasons, creating large-scale unemployment, not caring a damn about it, one way or the other. And this creates a problem which many politicians and political parties find it difficult to deal with. Syriza did deal with it, and they won. So that is a big thing. The Germans feel they have to effectively, whether they say it or not, crush Syriza to stop other people, to stop the disease from spreading. Syriza has become an infection for them. And this infection has to be stopped quickly, which is why they want to push it back, to maneuver around it, hoping Syriza will split into two groups, and then they can work with this group and even find some support, but kick out all the others who challenge all this. Don't think they don't think like that. They do, which is why it's very interesting that half the things I've said today, maybe a bit less, a quarter, are also being said by columnists in the New York Times. I mean, if you look at Paul Krugman, he's been telling the Greeks, don't cave into blackmail. If you look at Wolfgang Munkau, a German columnist writing in the Financial Times, he was giving advice to Syriza from the columns of the Financial Times, saying, this is what you can do to fight them back, create a special internal currency, a Euro Plus, which functions as a currency inside Greece alone, keep the euros for external dealings, and move forward. Don't bow down to the blackmail. Because everyone realizes that what is involved here is large-scale blackmail by the Germans. The hardline Germans, the hawks in the German Ministry of Finance and within the state bureaucracy, are putting on a very brave act. They're saying, well, if Greece withdraws from the euro, so be it. We don't care. We are not now where we were in 2012. We have made many, many readjustments, and a Grexit will not affect us too much. It's bluff. Basically, given the volatility of the markets and how the economy functions these days, based as it is largely on financial speculation, there is no guarantee whatsoever as to what will happen if Greece were to withdraw from the euro. They don't know. It's a bluff. And therefore, there are many trump cards in the hands of the Greek government. It's very difficult to operate in a milieu that is totally hostile. I felt quite sad, really sad when I saw Tsipras traveling first to Italy to be snubbed by this creepy politician Renzi, who models himself on Tony Blair. Can you imagine anything worse in the world today? A corrupt warmonger, and this Italian idiot says, I will be the Italian Tony Blair. Do you even know what you're talking about, man? And they go there, and he pleads, and naturally the Italian says no. He meets Hollande, who makes sweet noises, but don't forget what Hollande did in 2012. Anyway, Hollande is far too busy ordering croissants. So it's no support at all from within Europe. And the governments of these little countries, Portugal, Ireland, Slovakia, who are in the EU, are very nervous because they too, from their side, feel if Syriza succeeds, we've had it, we're out of power. So that is the scale of the problem that confronts Syriza today. And it really is a democratic deficit in the EU that is responsible for this. An EU totally undemocratic. The Germans pushed through Juncker to be the new president. Who is Juncker? You think he's a harmless guy. He was Prime Minister of Luxembourg, which is a duchy, you know, barely as big as Soho in New York. And what harm can he do? But you know, some of these tiny little countries can do a lot of harm because their banks are unregulated. And Juncker was heavily involved in the government of this tiny duchy of Luxembourg when a large-scale corruption took place there. Large-scale corruption. And this is the guy who was involved with many banking scams, who green-lighted them, who refused to take action against corrupt banks when he knew what they were doing, and the Germans insist on making him the president of the European Commission. So how can anyone have trust in the structures of the European Union? The European Union is a good idea, but the idea initially, when it began to become a serious proposition, as the French socialist leader Jacques Delors then put it, what we want is a social Europe which is different from North America. We want a Europe which offers an alternative to the way capitalism functions in the United States of America. That was the plan. The collapse of the Soviet Union effectively finished that off. That is what gave the imperial ruling elite the power, the fact that the United States is now the world's only global empire. There's never been anything such as this ever in the history of humanity. There have always been rivals, this, that, and the other, and there are still some rivals, but in terms of military strength and ideological power, there is nothing quite like the United States today. And the Europeans bow to this power. They don't challenge it. Had the initial plan been carried through, who knows what the world would have been like? It might have been very different. But that is not what happened. But today, as was said earlier, Greece is in the forefront. People who didn't even know Greece existed are now reading these reports in the American media for the first time of what's going on. And so a lot depends on how Syriza operates, let's put it like that, in the next 4 months, 5 months, even if they get this breathing space. A breathing space is important if you have a strategic plan on how to move beyond that. Then you can explain many tactical retreats. But if you have no strategic plan of how to proceed further, then the tactical retreats begin to add up. And the worst possible thing would be, the worst, if the Greek people began to say that this is just like what we had before. This is PASOK Mark II. That will be the end, I'm just telling you. And it will not be a nice end. It will demoralize all the progressive forces in Europe. And within Greece itself, it will indirectly give a huge boost to the right. Because this is not a country in which the right doesn't exist. As I said when I began talking, that the civil war marked Greek society for many, many years. And the heirs of one side of that civil war, because many people who collaborated with the Germans fought against the Greek communists and partisans. And Golden Dawn is what's left of that heritage. And these are not people who pretend to be post-fascists or, people who had bad past but who've now moved on from them, like the Fini did in Italy and to a certain extent Le Pen in France, even though both those parties still have hardcore fascists within them. But the Greek Golden Dawn, with its support, with its membership, with its parliamentary representation, are open fascists. They operate like fascists. Their ideology is fascist ideology. They carry out pogroms of migrant groups, especially Pakistani immigrants in Greece, on that particular basis. So once people get disillusioned with the left, they often turn to the right. Now, I say this, and I know that many, many people in Syriza, including Tsipras, and including many of the leaders, know all this. One is not telling them anything new. But knowing it is not enough. It's acting on it that is absolutely crucial. And in the months ahead, the EU elite is going to use the 4 months, if the deal is signed on Monday, to try and demoralize and weaken Syriza further and actually exacerbate problems within their ranks. Get them to do things which are even unnecessary, but insisting on them so they get more and more unpopular at home. Don't think that this is my imagination. This is how these countries and big powers operate. So we are literally at a very critical time in the history of Greece and the history of Europe. If Syriza manage to pull through, if they do what is necessary, either before the 4 months are over or after, with the support of the Greek people, then there is a lot to hope for. And I am one of those who doesn't despair easily. I do believe in hope, because hope is an active emotion. Despair reduces you to passivity. And it's that active emotion that we need in Greece today and in the rest of Europe if we're going to move forward. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tariq. Tariq Ali has accepted some questions. So if you wanted to ask something, please come up to the microphone so we can all hear you.
Can we start?
Okay.
I just have a question about the rise and essentially the stalling of the Golden Dawn in Greece versus other sort of proto-fascist parties in Europe like Le Front National. So I wonder if you can explain what Syriza was able to accomplish between 2012 and 2015 in the recent election. So Syriza and Golden Dawn were essentially rising at the same speed in opinion polls and parliamentary seats, whereas in France, for example, Hollande, who campaigned and won on a platform of anti-austerity and has delivered nothing of the sort, we see no commensurate rise in the Front de Gauche, but we see a rise in the Front National. So is this kind of balancing out, or how do these forces work? Yeah.
If I get you right, what you said was, how did Syriza move from 2012 to 2015?
Well, but essentially, that they were able to defeat this this rise of inchoate fascism.
And the comparison with France is that the left is in a state of crisis, and
and that they moved.
Well, this is it's absolutely true. Both countries have similar and different traditions, and the interesting thing you have to understand is that people, young people especially, want political parties they support to break with the center, the extreme center. They don't like people who hang on to it. And Syriza did that by making a total break in every way with PASOK. And it was seen as an alternative then not just to the conservatives, but also to PASOK. That was key, in my opinion, for the big rise of Syriza. And they said this very clearly. We don't agree with you, we don't like you, this is what you've done, you've completely sold out the people of Greece to the Troika and the EU elite. That's what they said, which is why they won. In France, the far left groups are in a very, very tiny minority and very ineffective. Secondly, the main group of the far left, led by Mélenchon, will not break from the Socialist Party. Will not break. They say it's because we're in alliance with the PCF, and the PCF in France today is largely, in my opinion, they don't run campaigns, they don't mobilize people. It's a party of disused buildings and old age pensioners. So the PCF has many buildings in different parts of the country going back to the heroic days. And the deal with the Socialist Party offers the mayors in some towns in France, which they don't want to lose. But in terms of actual political influence and impact, it's very limited. So this failure of people to the left of the SP to totally break with the SP has created this crisis. And this is where Le Pen comes in. She speaks very bluntly. Often she says things, I hate to admit this, often she says things which are in defense of basic social democratic demands for the people, which is why so many white workers, once who used to vote for the PCF, have switched sides, Many a stronghold. And that is a danger in Greece I'm pointing out to if we fail.
My question is, what can Syriza do, like right away, to improve the situation of ordinary Greek people? For example, there's millions who lost their health care. They can't afford their medicine. I mean, could they expand the social services, like rescind all the cuts that have happened over 10 years? Could they do things like that? Could they lower the price of food? Could they decrease unemployment? Because I think it's really important for people to feel, they can't wait. And you look at the right wing, when they get into power very quickly, they take things away. So is it possible for Syriza to restore those cuts, to make people feel like we really won something? I think that's critical.
Yeah, I agree with you. And so the Syriza leadership knows this very well, which is why symbolically some of the things they did in the weeks after coming to power was an acknowledgement to what you're saying. Mm-hmm. Varoufakis dismissed some middle-grade managers, who were unnecessary, and took back the cleaning women who had been sacked from their jobs and who had been campaigning for years to demand their jobs back. It was a tiny symbolic gesture, but very important. Tsipras himself did what no other Greek prime minister has done and went to the tombs of the partisans where they were buried to pay a warm tribute to those who had helped defeat the fascists during the Second World War. That hadn't been done. So they've been very strong on symbolisms, and now they have to go further. Look, sometimes I get too harsh. It's not easy. It's not an easy situation for any government at the moment, because you always feel that, let's say we do what we might have to do, is withdraw from the Eurozone. How is that going to affect the people we want to help in Greece? And how is it going to help us restore the cuts? Some things can be done very easily. Crooked deals that were carried out, like selling or preparing to sell off all that beautiful land next to the old airport in Athens to some bunch of hustlers and crooks calling themselves businessmen at very low prices. That has been stopped. Piraeus they've also put a freeze on what was going to happen there. So their intentions are good. The big question is this: where is the money going to come from to start changing things? Of course, I repeat this for the fourth time, putting real pressure globally in taking the Germans to the International Court to demand that the Greek gold they stole from the Greek banks during the Second World War is paid back. It's not a demagogic point, it's a real thing. That money alone could help to restore all the cuts and even pay off half the debt. It's not impossible. So that, and the second thing, of course, which is what frightens the United States the most at this moment, is that they will go to the Russians. Might be necessary and say, okay, we're not going to become a Russian puppet state, but we need some help. And the Chinese. Unfortunately, oil prices have gone down, not accidentally, I should add. Otherwise, the Venezuelans and South Americans would have given a lot of help, because Tsipras is very popular in South America. They would have got help from the Venezuelans were their own situation not so bad as it is today. So all this is fine. It's just a question of giving the people ultimately, and it'll be sooner rather than later, a choice. But to do that, the government has to say, this is the choice. We carry on as before, which is what the Germans are demanding and what you voted against, or we take more radical measures, which will mean effectively withdrawing from the Eurozone, not from Europe, from the Eurozone. You decide. And campaign then, and we will see. And I think the last opinion polls in Greece showed that I think 70% of the population was backing Tsipras and saying, fight back. Don't let these guys have their way. That already is a huge advance from the elections. So we will see.
I appreciate hearing you say so articulately the crushing effects of the austerity. But what I've also seen is at these gatherings, you often get one perspective and another, but not in this case. You made it very clear that the austerity was imposed on Greece and that is not a vehicle for growth. However, what I have found from the outside was a failure of the Greek leadership of the old establishment, New Democracy and PASOK. Papandreou had his chance, and Samaras had a chance, and the Greek media was failing to distinguish between the austerity measures, which have now this pejorative association with the word reform, and simple modernizing reforms that Greeks in the diaspora and Greeks in Greece have been hoping for years, doing something about the inequities in the tax collection, something about the corruption, something about making it possible for brilliant young Greek entrepreneurs in many fields who want to start businesses and who cannot. Where I'm told that even in Putin's Russia, you can open a business in 5 days now. And that's a joke in Greece. I don't know what Tsipras can do as far, given what we have seen. I like the word, I think you said farce, the last 2 weeks. But he does have an opportunity to move forward on, again, what I would call the modernizing reforms in these 4 months. And if they do that, I think 2 things can happen. I think the rest of Europe will be able to stand up to Germany and say, we must also help them in terms of growth, and then they will have an opportunity for other elements of the agenda. But it's an opportunity now to at least move forward on the basic reforms that are also important.
Well, I think that is the Tsipras government wants to be a modernizing government. There's no doubt about that at all. But, first they have to sort out the Europeans. And that is proving the problem. They're being hampered from doing what they want to do in Greece. And in fact, they would be strengthened in Greece itself if they finally, took on the Troika. That would give them the prestige to push through many modernizing reforms in Greece itself, including what I'm in favor of, is not allowing the church to go off tax-free. It has huge tracts of land, etc. Of course, that's a secondary question, but the key thing is taxing the rich, which no government has been able to do, and which this government could do with a great deal of public support. But look, when we talk about corruption in Greece, let's not forget that this level of tax corruption exists in every EU state. It's not just Greece. So those who give lectures to Greece from the European Union, there's a huge scandal just erupted in Britain, by the way, with the HSBC Bank and how its Swiss branch had been helping large numbers of people to avoid paying taxes. There have been scandals in the French banking system, in Germany too, though not on the same level. So when the Greeks are attacked saying there's a lot of corruption in Greece and your rich don't pay taxes, to that the reply could be made, there is also a lot of corruption in the rest of Europe, and many of your rich, especially the large corporations, are indulged so that they don't pay taxes. Because some of these governments fear that if you charge taxes to foreign corporations, they'll move away somewhere else. And that is a huge problem as well in the collection of tax in the whole of Europe. But on other questions, of course, Europe needs to be modernized as well, in not just Greece. I mean, as I spent many minutes explaining, it's a very undemocratic institution, which has now been federalized with Germany in command, effectively, on the economic level. And on the political level, huge problems. And one last point on this, that it is extremely, leaving aside Greece for a minute, it is extremely difficult to have a currency without having a unified political structure. No one has managed to do it before. The Europeans can't do it, so there is a crisis of the Eurozone even without Greece and the crisis of Greece. And this has to be remembered. In my opinion, it is going to be very difficult for the Germans to preserve the Eurozone as it is for the next 4 or 5 years. One more crisis and the thing could crumble. So what these European leaders should also look at is the problems they themselves create and for which they are responsible, instead of scapegoating Greece.
You were very eloquent in talking about the excitement that has been generated in some of the European countries by the Syriza success so far.
Could you speak up a bit? Yeah.
You have been very eloquent in talking about the excitement generated by the Syriza success in certain European countries, but not only by their success, but by the model that they present for what other countries may also do. But you stopped with certain European countries. What about for Great Britain, or in Great Britain, among the young people there, and even the United States? Could you talk about the excitement? Because there has been a great deal of excitement, as well as surprise about what has happened with Syriza in Greece. And the very model which Syriza has developed, what is its relevance for the more developed parts of the capitalist world? Great Britain, the US, and even Germany. Not immediately, but in the relatively near future.
Well, look, I can't start talking about the US now, because we'd be here all night. I mean, I do give lectures on the United States and its political structures, but I can't do justice to that question or say what should be done here. Likewise, Britain. I mean, Britain is breaking up. Mm-hmm. The old model of the UK state is breaking up. The May elections in Britain will show to what extent it has broken up. Because if the Labour Party is wiped out in Scotland, all the opinion polls at the moment are showing that 80% of Labour's traditional voters in Scotland will vote for the Independence Party. Many people, like the Syriza vote in 2012, are now feeling very ashamed that they were frightened into not voting for independence. It was a 10% difference. Many, many people have said this to me. We were scared. So it's the same campaigning skills that were used to frighten the Scots. If 80% of Scots vote for the Scottish National Party, well, that's curtains for Britain sooner or later. And then something might emerge in England comparable to Syriza or different or better, who knows? So it's Scotland, that part of Britain, on which eyes are focused, and that does have a very radical left movement, pro-independence left movement as well, which will keep the National Party on its toes. So that is what's happening there. America, look, we will talk about it on some other occasion. I promise you I think about it a lot, because it rules the world.
So this last question.
Thank you very much for your insight. Two-parter. First, if Greece cannot get money from, let's say, the EU, Germany, the US, or Russia, but would they turn to the Chinese or Japanese because they've got lots of cash? And second part, about the dual currency, would that be like Cuba, where one currency is for the tourists and one for everybody else? Is that what would happen?
Yeah. The dual currency idea is an idea which emerged in the Financial Times. Interestingly enough, it not my idea. I was quoting Munkau in the FT, who said that would be one way to proceed, very much like the Cubans, except that's not the example he gave, because Cuba has its own currency and the dollar, both existing, and that is what Munkau was effectively proposing for Greece. Create your own currency for internal use, but also use the euro for trade and other forms of purchases and trade, etc. So, they could do it. It's obviously something that their economists are considering. What was the first part of it?
Could they get money from Japan or China?
Could they not raise money from China and Japan? Those two countries haven't got where they have by throwing money, so they would need something in return. The Russians might offer it to annoy the Americans, to be perfectly blunt with you, given what's going on in the Ukraine, etc. But I think the Chinese would want something in return. Let's suppose the Greek government says we're going to stop any attempts to privatize Piraeus, the port, and ask for Chinese help to come in. Okay, the Chinese could come in, but then the Chinese will also insist that they bring their own workers with them. In many parts of the world, they do that. So how will that help Greek unemployment? And the second thing, they will say, we don't allow trades unions. That's our national policy. Well, that's unacceptable in Greece and many other countries. Britain would accept it. But I don't think the Greek trade unions and political parties, including the parties of the right, would accept that at the moment. So these are not, most of these things, I'm sure, are being considered and discussed by the Syriza economists, and they have a set of incredibly powerful economists inside Syriza who have been in different parts of Europe and have all gone back to try and help the country now. So we shall see.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Tariq.